Hello and welcome to Transforming Tomorrow, the podcast from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability and Business here at Lancaster University Management School. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Bebbington.
Now, Jan, we've got a special little mini episode here. We're joined once again by Camilo Cornejo Martinez, and we drew our conversation to a close last time where we were talking about various things such as just transitions, and I was aware there was a couple of topics that we didn't quite get to cover, so we wanted to come back this time and discuss them now.
And in particular, it was Glocal. And so Paul loves new words. I mean, turn it into a verb and he'll be happier still.
Glocalisation.
So, could you tell us what does Glocal mean and what's the idea behind the usage of that term?
Yeah, of course. As we talked in the previous episode, there are new things that are happening in environmental law and international environmental law as consequence of the challenge that we're facing: climate change, loss of biodiversity, pollution. And one of the consequences for the discipline is that for many years we thought that international law was something for states. International public law was something for exclusively a state, and states had their meetings, their agreements, and they discuss different topics with a global perspective. But what is happening with climate change particularly is that states start realizing that the decisions that they take at international level are deeply influenced by what is happening in some local communities. And vice versa, there are local communities that are applying directly some of the agreements that are taking states and international level, trying to solve the problems and the conflicts between communities and the environment. And just to give an example, and that is why it's so important, this idea of Glocal in the current international environmental law movement. Climate change, originally the discussion was also between states. What states can do, how much ambition could be some regulations. But then some local communities start making legal complaints against states, business, and different actors. And those communities, instead of applying the local regulation, they said, well, we have some international agreement, like Paris Agreement. And that agreement between states said that we need to achieve the goal of 1.5 Celsius degrees. So those communities applying that international agreement said that the decision at local level should be considered in a different way.
So would that be, so the University of Lancaster has declared a climate emergency and is seeking to do a transition as fast as it can towards net zero. Would that be an example of a global approach?
Yeah, exactly. Because actually one of the consequences of this movement is that when we start considering the international agreements, we also need to start considering other soft law documents that states or organizations are taking in this matter. And one of the things that United Nations and the Special Program on Climate Change was advocating was to a special partnership or special stakeholders need to achieve more fast some climate goals. So doesn't matter, for example, if UK does not enact any specific law for universities achieving net zero. But United Nations said with this general agreement, it's enough for the universities to start taking more measures.
A new word. I think I approve of this new word.
Yeah, you know me and new words that seem to just be made up for the fun of it. I'm not a big fan, but at least it isn't, like you say, being turned into a verb. So that's better. Universities, from that perspective, could also be treated as something like a company. So where we're talking about localized things such as a university, because we think of it as a local community almost and taking up a certain amount of area, would it also apply to companies though? So companies acting on a company level, is that considered a level of like localization?
It's the point, and that is the interesting aspect of the discussion on the climate conflict at international level. If you see, for example, the news and some claims against fossil fuel companies like Shell, the source of that claim and the basis of that claim is not a local regulation. The source of that claim is an international agreement. And specifically, the source of that claim is the human rights approach. Companies now are facing the challenge that in their operations, they need to consider not just the country regulation. They also need to consider human rights approach, and they also need to consider the climate goals, although those regulations were born for a state, not specifically for companies.
And I guess this applies on a local level because companies might have a factory in a certain area that might cause certain levels of pollution or effects on the local populations there. I know that two of the centre members, Dexina de Silva and Anita Schiller from our Department of Economics here at Lancaster, do work on how companies vary their behaviours with regards to pollution and the outputs of pollution, and how this varies depending upon the actual income levels of the people who live in the areas local to the factories. And I guess that demonstrates that's on like a state regional level in America. That's within the state of that country. But then this is going to apply all across the world as well, whereas certain companies operating in one country will operate one way, but they'll operate in a different way in a different country.
Yeah, and the argument is particularly evident in the case of investment. So there are some banks or some investment funds that are receiving complaints, not because they are directly linked with fossil fuel projects, but just because they don't have a climate policy according to the international goals. So for some investment is enough for that to make a complaint against them. And why is so important, or why is the argument for investment having a global vision on goals on sustainability? Because the influence at global and local perspective at the same time. That is why some NGOs and some communities are pushing for these transnational activities to have a clear guidance on sustainability.
We use the terms global north and global south, which you might think, oh, that's north of the equator, south of the equator, but that's not really how it works. It's more, in some ways, it's the way we used to say first world, third world, in some ways, although those definitions as well are very loose and not necessarily very helpful in lots of ways. Is there a difference between how it plays out for the global north, the global south, and the attitudes that you come across there and the legal structures and frameworks that you come across there?
Yeah, well, this idea of global north and global south, well, is contested, by the way. It's not an easy topic. But the scholarship who is advocating for bringing this distinction between global north and global south in transnational sustainability topics wants to make the point that there are historical differences between some countries because these historical legacies. There are some activities that when those activities are done in the global south, we need to put special attention because of a history of marginalized communities, poverty, water scarcity. So the argument of the scholarship on this distinction between global north and global south at the end is for acknowledging that not all the places are equal. Not all the countries are equal. Although the Global South is very diverse, there are special needs in Global South, like, for example, the need for strong institutions. And companies, when start working on that places, need to also work on that areas.
That was really great, Camilo. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us, Camilo, for 2 episodes. That's been a really interesting insight into your work and your research.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Next time, Jan, I'll be joined by you. We don't have a guest next time. It's just me and you. And I believe we're discussing things that are wicked, things that are clumsy. Are we just discussing you? Sorry.
Yeah, it's all about me.
We're discussing wicked problems, clumsy solutions, and post-normal science. 3 phrases which, in preparing for the next episode, I've become overly familiar with.
Brilliant.
So, until then, I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Bevington.